On today's episode of the Milk Making Minutes, you will hear a story that does involve some postpartum health complications as well as some breastfeeding complications. You will also hear at the very end a story of difficulty breastfeeding in public, and you will also hear her difficulty that she had with her work environment. But the biggest thing you're going to hear is a theme of learning to understand the baby she had in front of her. And when you are a first-time parent, that is a hard thing to do because you have nothing to compare it to, and because often there are so many outside voices telling you your baby should be different than how your baby is. But this is a beautiful story of Otilia learning to breastfeed the baby that she had in front of her, learning to trust that baby's cues and breastfeed in a way that met each baby's needs, which were very different. Her first baby breastfed very differently than her second baby. They had very different temperaments. So I'm so excited to bring you this story to help relieve your own anxiety around your children, your babies, to bring you more breastfeeding confidence with the babies that you are feeding. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. Many of my clients are surprised by their own self-doubt and anxiety over every baby feeding decision. And in the years that I've been connecting with people during pregnancy and breastfeeding, I've seen time and time again that those anxieties are reduced through hearing from others about their experiences without judgment or fear. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh. I invite you to sit back and listen in to reduce your breastfeeding anxiety through explorations of real-life breastfeeding. Hi, Otilia. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Lo. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. So why don't you start out by introducing yourself and your family?
Okay. So my name is Otilia. I'm a mom to two children. They are now 8 and 6. And I'm a working mom as well. I work 5 days a week as a healthcare professional. And we take turns into being at home all the time, myself and my husband. So I work during the week, he works the weekend, so that the children are always at home, not in after school or anything. It's one of our values to be close to them while they grow. So that is our situation very briefly at the minute.
Yeah, that's so great. And what part of the world are you in?
Ireland. I'm a resident of Ireland, but I'm actually a Romanian by descent.
Oh, wow. Okay. Very good. So you are my first international guest. You have that honor.
So delighted. I think
Yes.
the diversity in the background, it's something that is crucial to the breastfeeding story in general.
I cannot agree more. Yeah. And to have not only the multicultural perspective from, having your Romanian background being in Ireland, but also how are things done from country to country and from place to place when it comes to postpartum care.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was your exposure to breastfeeding before you were pregnant and making decisions about feeding your own babies?
Okay, I love this question so much. It's such a thoughtful question. So the first time I could ever remember having been exposed to breastfeeding, it wasn't when I was breastfed, because I believed it did happen for a couple of months, but my mom had to return to work, I think 4 or 5 months postpartum. The first time I actually remember it, and it's my earliest memory of something to do with breastfeeding, was when I was about 5 or 6. In Romania, children go to school once they are 7.
Mm-hmm.
This was before starting school, 5 or 6. And one of my aunties had just had a baby girl. And I was at home with my parents. We were having dinner. And this new baby had just arrived within the extended family. And there was this discussion between a dad and mom. And I didn't perceive it as judgmental, but it's something that stayed with me ever since. So my dad said to my mom something along the lines like, "Oh, she decided not to breastfeed her baby. I wonder why." So there was,
Wow.
yeah, as far as I remember from the conversation, there must have been more to it, okay? But it stayed with me that babies are being breastfed.
Otilia gave several examples of colleagues who she knew that started breastfeeding right before her. She was surprised that one in particular from Chinese Malaysia breastfed well beyond the 1 year mark. Then, as she began her journey, a couple of stories of breastfeeding beyond a year emerged within her own family. This is one that serves as a poignant example of what can happen when a well meaning person interferes with the breastfeeding dyad.
So my husband is from a family of two, and so am I. And they are two brothers, two boys. So his younger brother apparently was breastfed until he was about 2.5, when himself and his mom, my mother-in-law, were visiting his own grandmother, and the grandmother was a mom of 10. She thought this was very odd for a child that is 2.5 to be still breastfeeding and to be still bothering his mom at night and not letting her sleep. So she took it upon herself too. Then,
Wow.
yeah, so apparently they spent a few nights together, himself and the granny. And that was the end of his breastfeeding journey. And he shared with me later when I was on my breastfeeding journey. So, a male within my extended family that would have an open conversation about breastfeeding shared with me that, I hated her ever since.
Wow. He remembered, or he at least had the feelings of what that
Yes,
was like that he
yes,
stored.
yes,
Wow. What a story. Okay. So you knew you were going to feed, you had it in your mind, breastfeed for at least about 6 months. And you had this example of a colleague feeding for over a year.
yes,
And then later on, as you were breastfeeding, these other family stories came out of longer breastfeeding examples.
yes, yes.
Okay. So then how did breastfeeding start for you? And I know you have two children, 8 and 6, so you can kind of talk about them both or one at a time, whatever makes the
Yeah.
most sense as you compare them.
I know there's a lot to it, and when you start talking about these things, I probably want to go on and on. I will try to be brief though, and I'll probably talk about the first one and then about the second one. So my first born is a boy. He's 8 now, and my breastfeeding journey with him lasted for 8 months. It was an unexpected rocky start because I didn't know what I was going into. As I said to you earlier, I thought everything was going to be natural and, you just go with it and that's it. But I actually felt thrown at the deep end. Like in the hospital, I felt, there were complications with birth. Okay. I'm the first time mom, like I had to be induced and then the baby wasn't turning. And then I was into labor for way too long and I had no more energy. And then the birth had to be assisted, forceps delivery. And he happened to be a sleepy kind of baby. And like I would have to wake him and wake him and wake him so he would feed because he seemed to be dozing off at the breast. But what I want to say, which is also I find it very important because I'm quite reflective in nature. I had reflected a lot about the process and I was talking to other moms as well. What I want to mention is that in the hospital, there were amazing, amazing healthcare professionals, midwives and nurses. I didn't have much to do with doctors, to be honest. Like a doctor had to assist the delivery and a doctor had to assess the baby. So I'm very grateful for that. But my main support there for the 3 days I was in hospital were nurses and midwives. And what I do remember was that there was this one nurse and she was quite mature. She was a mom of 10 and she told me she breastfed the 10 of them. So she came to help me latch the baby because even though babies have a natural instinct on how to do it, it's not as easy as that. As a mom, you are being told that it shouldn't hurt, it should feel comfortable, but there's so many degrees of not hurting and of feeling comfortable when you haven't done this before. And there is so much to the context, like you're so tired, so overwhelmed by everything. It's trauma that as a woman, you're going through birth as well. And I'm sure the baby is going through some kind of trauma as well. So there is so much like hormones down, hormones up, lack of sleep. as I said, tiredness, having gone through all this, becoming a parent, feeling so responsible. Like, how am I doing this? How am I changing him? How am I dressing him? How am I washing him? How do I know he ate enough? There's so many questions, so many insecurities that you feel in a place where ideally you would have a lot of support. And I felt I had that support in the hospital. Like this one person that told me, I breastfed my 10 and I will help you start with yours. That was so, so important. Like, one person to be telling you that, to have the reassurance and the confidence that you can anchor yourself into the confidence of this person so that you can start off the ground,
And she was approaching you as both a nurse and a mother.
Yes, she was. And I felt that and I was so grateful for it. And then I remember some of them have come with a little syringes of formula just in case we needed it. I honestly don't know I can't remember whether I have used it or not. I can't remember because, my goal, my aim, I didn't think of alternatives. I wasn't against it, against formula or anything, but, this is what I was there for. I was going to feed my baby. That was my aim. And so no matter what. And then he was kind of feeding. We were kind of doing okay on discharge. And then on day 3 or 4, the milk came in and the engorgement happened. And that was the day when the public health nurse visited for the heel prick test. And she was, okay, so she had to try it a couple of times and the baby got very upset, as they do. And she was like, well, you'll know for sure he's going to sleep for a couple of hours now. And sleep he did. And that took a couple of hours when I experienced the hell of engorgement.
Otilia describes sending her husband out to buy a breast pump from a pharmacy, not once, but twice, because they washed the tubing with the first pump. She was pumping to try to relieve the engorgement. She told me that although she herself was a healthcare professional, she did not know that lactation consultants existed, nor had any of her colleagues who had recently given birth. As you will hear, this lasted for many weeks. You will now hear me ask Otilia if she knows why she was experiencing so much engorgement. I ask this because although this is common, it is a sign that something isn't going well. And if a lactation consultant had been available to work with her, they may have been able to identify the cause of the engorgement. She then tells a story of an undiagnosed birth complication that can have an impact on milk supply.
Do you have any ideas about why you were experiencing so much severe engorgement? Was your baby not transferring enough milk?
So I believe that was the main thing because I already knew he was kind of a sleepy baby. So he was feeding a little bit, he was dozing off. And as a result, because he wasn't feeding enough, he would wake frequently, like within an hour or so. When I would have hoped, he would maybe last 2 hours or more. And then there were some complications from the birth that I didn't know of. And I was expecting, it wasn't just the engorgement and, being in so much discomfort and the baby not feeding that much, but there were some complications with the birth and I didn't know. I was hoping to feel better every day and to get stronger every day, but I wasn't. I was feeling weaker and weaker. And I was in about day 10. I was so unwell. I just wanted to die. I couldn't get off the bed. So it was a birth complication, like a placenta,
A
retained placenta,
Yeah.
retained placenta that I didn't know about. I didn't know about at the time. And I got an infection. And at day 10 or 11, we ended up back in the hospital and did run all sorts of blood tests and investigations. And they just put me on an antibiotic. They were questioning, is it a mastitis brewing? Is it the episiotomy scar getting infected? Is it this? Is it that? The only thing I remember was me telling them that, I bleed a lot, but the doctor that was reviewing me didn't think that was unusual. So they didn't investigate that part.
So when you were hospitalized, they allowed the baby to be admitted with you?
Oh, definitely. Okay. Yeah, I was in for about 3 days. So that first night, like I remember, like in the stories, you want to fall as like one of those heroes in the stories. You have to stay awake because something dramatic is going to happen if you fall asleep.
The retained placenta was never identified in the hospital. She remained for 3 days, was sent home on antibiotics, and remained sick another 8 days until she delivered the remaining piece of placenta on her own at home. She began to feel better immediately, but her engorgement was not relieved because of her continued reliance on the pump in addition to breastfeeding. I see this frequently when pumping begins in the early weeks before milk supply is established by nursing.
I was creating lots and lots of demand with the baby and the pump. Therefore, I was producing loads. And I can't remember, but it probably took longer than 2 months to get into a routine. I continuously pumped because I was building a stash. I knew I would return to work when the baby was 7 months old. And then I was in the mindset that I want him to have a supply of milk available. So I was pretty much doing it on the daily, I suppose.
So how many sessions a day were you pumping?
Honestly, I cannot remember, but it may have been about 2.
Okay. At that point, how many weeks or months out are you at this point when you're down to 2 sessions a day?
Probably 6 months.
Okay, so you're six months out and you're down to 2 sessions a day.
Yeah.
Which is a reasonable amount if somebody's trying to have if they're feeling anxious about the amount of milk that their baby will have while they're going back to work.
Yeah.
When you were experiencing the engorgement in those early days and weeks, was it 2 sessions a day then, or was it?
Oh, no. I couldn't tell you a number. I was probably using it to bring comfort to my breast multiple times a day. I couldn't tell you a number. It was there as a tool that I would use frequently during the days and the nights.
Right.
Yeah. Day and night.
And so how long was your baby pretty sleepy and having trouble removing a decent amount of milk on his own at any given session?
I would say he had always been like that, low. Like he didn't grow out of it, of being sleepy. But I did get used to how to keep him awake. Like I used to do a lot of singing, and this was one of the reasons why I used to do a lot of singing. All the nursery rhymes I could think of, and I learned lots of new ones. A way of, keep him interested to drink, to feed for longer.
Wow. Okay. Were there ever any concerns about his weight gain?
No.
His growth? Okay.
No.
Yeah, so that was just kind of his personality.
That was his personality, yeah.
Okay. Is he still a little bit more of a relaxed guy?
100%.
Okay.
Like he would be the type of person that would fall asleep so deeply. If he's in his deep sleep, there is no chance you could wake him or do anything. You could not. Like he sleeps so deep when he falls asleep. He doesn't need to sleep during the day. Like he didn't need to sleep during the day from probably 3 years old, maybe a little bit earlier, around there. But he would have like solid night sleeps, and he would sleep so deeply, yeah. And he's still like that to this day. And he is, the relaxed, laid back kind of person, definitely 100%.
Isn't that funny? We can see that from those very early days.
Yeah.
But when you're a new mom or a new parent and you're in those early breastfeeding days, it is really hard to lean into your intuition and know, is this the personality of my baby, or is this something I should be concerned about?
Yeah, so I wasn't exactly concerned. I don't know. My intuition was telling me not to be concerned. Like I felt I grew to feel in control and confident that my baby was feeding and gaining weight. Like he was doing really well at all his developmental milestones. And there wasn't ever a question. There wasn't ever a worry, although he was a small birth weight. My instinct was telling me that we were doing well. It's just that I am in so much discomfort. He is falling asleep so frequently. But I grew to develop systems to keep him awake and interested for longer. I told you I started sync, so that worked.
Yeah, and he probably nursed more frequently. So he, instead of having these long sessions and then stretching it out for 3 or 4 hours, he would have shorter sessions and
nurse more frequently.
Yeah.
definitely. And
And that's a perfect example of why it's really important to tune into the baby you have and the body you have. And, we can't always dictate what the schedule of our particular baby is going to be.
no, no, no. It's just that it's something I believe in, tuning into the same frequency as a parent and your baby. Like nobody can tell you from outside, oh, mine went this way, yours may go the same. It's such a special little connection. It's so unique, so individual to each one of us. You can't tell. And I am very passionate about this as well.
Mm. Hmm. So, at what point did you feel like you were able to do that? Like, how long did it take you to feel like, I've got this, I've got the engorgement under control, I feel confident in both breastfeeding and using the pump in a way that's working for me? How long did it take you to really settle into
Probably
that?
4 months. Around
4 months.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so, up until that 4 month mark, how did you cope with the uncertainty?
It was pretty hard because, the nipples would be uncomfortable and I didn't know about nipple shields at the time. Well, I knew about the compresses, to help healing if I had broken skin and things like that. And I know about the lanolin cream that I was using. But again, because there wasn't any known formal support like lactation consultant, I pretty much struggled. It was a struggle. And it's so wonderful for that there are people like you nowadays that are there to support people. It's just that first time, I think not enough importance, not enough time and awareness or building awareness is given to preparation of mindset before breastfeeding because that is it's a critical timeline. Like when the baby is in your arm, you can do
Right.
whatever you have prepared to be doing at that moment in time. If we haven't given much thought, and if we thought like I did, that it's just going to happen because I'm equipped for this, and the baby has instincts.
Right.
It is just the perfect ground for disillusion or for expectations to not be met.
Right. I always encourage people to call a few lactation consultants in their area while they're pregnant in those prenatal days and just talk to a few and think to themselves, who did I really click with? Who did I feel was a really good listener and got me and my goals and is going to understand how to help me best? Because when you're right, when you have the baby in your arms and it feels so urgent to meet that baby's needs in the moment, it's really hard then to then make the calls, find the person, get them to your house. In a matter of days, if they can't see you for a few days, it's hard to jump on it and get that started. But if you already have the person's name saved in your phone, they already have your intake info, and all you have to do is say, okay, I'm ready for you, it's a lot easier for them to get going and get you in their schedule.
I agree with you there, Lo, 100%. Like you're so right. This is a process. This is a skill that we learn or we need to learn if we want to do this. Like my passion within this area is so strong. I am training to become a coach for moms to build self-efficacy during parenting, early parenting days. And it started with a passion for breastfeeding, being a breastfeeding advocate because breastfeeding is a process, breastfeeding is a skill. And as you said, identifying, the steps to master the process, identifying the steps to acquire the skill is essential before the baby is in our arms. Like identify, as you said, the support available to me. Like we wouldn't send the child to school with a pen and a few pieces of paper and expect the child to return from their first day of school knowing how to write, do we?
No, right, of course. Yeah.
So how could we expect of ourselves to go to the hospital or have a home birth and have the baby, put them at the breast and think that things are just going to happen? Like it's something that we need to give more thought to, particularly because we are so far removed from the village of support that our parents, our grandparents, or great-grandparents may have experienced during their early parenting days when it was probably very natural to have a neighbor or a relative.
Exactly. That's
Imagine.
exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. When people ask, why is it so hard? That's exactly what I say, because we haven't been watching all the people around us breastfeed and change the position here and move their breasts this way and adjust the baby that way. It's just a lost art now. So we're rebuilding that lost art. And so it takes more work to learn
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And what you said there about calling a couple of lactation consultants during pregnancy and see whom you connect with and whom do you feel you get on with really well, that is so important. So important. If you want to give it the best shot, isn't it? It's the one-to-one attention from somebody that you really like, somebody that you have researched before or had been recommended to, from by somebody you trust. That is how you get to maybe be exposed to a style or two and decide whether, you tune in to this person, you can connect with this person, whether you have something in common, whether you feel this person can listen in a way that helps you.
Okay, so you get to the 6-month mark and you're feeling pretty good. You feel like, or even the 4-month mark, you feel like you've settled into your routine. Did you end up going back to your full-time work
Yes.
at 6
So
months?
I returned, like I didn't know otherwise at the time. As a new parent, I didn't know otherwise. So I returned to work full time.
Mhm.
And at the hospital where I used to work had this policy where they would allow a pumping or a breastfeeding session. It was a break or something if you returned to work before 26 weeks.
Okay.
And it felt to me that I have never come across a hypocrisy bigger than that because, that is the mark when you return to work, that is the maternity leave over. Like, why would
Right.
you allow breastfeeding breaks until then and not after then?
Right.
This was a public kind of organization, and there were within the public system other organizations that have gone on with the recommendations of the World Health Organization, and they have implemented policies for their staff to avail of breastfeeding or pumping breaks up to 2 years of age. It didn't happen within my organization, and it was this thing, you can avail of them. While I was still in maternity leave returning to work, they were like, oh, yeah. There is a room dedicated. You can go there, no problem. And then once I returned to work, they were like, oh, but you're 6 months, you're over that time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I felt so defeated. I couldn't believe it. So my two other colleagues, my friends, who were also new parents, we were all taking turns and supporting each other at breastfeeding during our breaks. So we had 2 breaks during the working day, and we would use a dusty, unused office space, and we would take turns into going in there and having our sandwich or a meal and pumping within those 30 minutes. So that was that. But at this rate, I couldn't pump much. And my stash was going lower and lower. Like I couldn't keep building up with the needs of my child. He was 7 months old at this time. And then my mother-in-law swapped roles with my mom. She took over. They were coming to help us with childcare while we were at work. And my mother-in-law, I think when she didn't have enough breast milk to put in a bottle, she started giving my son the formula. Of course, this is something we had agreed on. It's not a decision that she took on herself. But because I couldn't produce enough milk, as I said, I returned to work 5 days a week. I was a full-time working mom, and I didn't have proper breastfeeding or pumping sessions at work, to make up for what my child needed. Because remember, at the 6-month mark, they only get to have little tastings of food, if you can consider that. It's not, you are introducing them to tastes and flavors. It's not as if they're going to be doing well just from that. Breast milk is still their main source of food and nutrients. If the position I was in, it didn't allow for it to be building enough or to be pumping enough to have. And then by 8 months, we were on a holiday, and I think it was during the night or something, and my husband gave my son prepared bottle of formula, and that was it. Like, he never looked back. He wasn't ever interested in breast. Like, he transitions to formula and solids from 8 months of age. That was the end of our breastfeeding journey. And I wasn't sad or disappointed. I was disappointed with my employer, for kind of not being very transparent on how exactly things are. But I thought I did pretty good.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I should have probably gone on for longer because my child had to go to crash for 3 days a week when he turned 1. And I think that if he would have stayed on breast milk, it would have helped him a great deal because as they do, they pick up all sorts of illnesses. He picked up lots of upper respiratory illnesses and ear infections. And he was having ear infections back to back for about 2 years. His hearing was decreased, and I didn't realize for a full year that he had an issue with his hearing. And, I firmly believe that if I had kept that going, it would have protected him a great deal.
We can always look back and say, oh man, I should have done it this way. But if we can tell our past selves, you did the best job you could do in that moment. That's all we can do at any given time.
Yes, exactly.
Even when it comes to breastfeeding, there's going to be thousands of decisions that we make along the way as our children grow, where in any given moment, we're just making the best decision we can at that moment.
Yeah.
And you're right that so many people have this story of going to work when we don't have enough leave, first of all, enough paid leave. And then once we do go back to work after the amount of leave we have, we don't have the right supports once we're there to continue to maintain our milk supply. And that's a systemic failure, not an individual failure.
Yeah. I'm very well aware of it, at this stage. But while being in that situation, it's impossible to do otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Do you love to read about pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding? Are you looking for books to help you become a more confident parent? Or perhaps books to help you understand what went wrong with your breastfeeding journey or to do better next time with breastfeeding? Or do your kids have questions about breastfeeding or pregnancy, but you don't really know how to answer them? Would you prefer to have a curated list on these topics? Go to the link in the show notes to my new affiliated bookshop. Every purchase you make benefits the Milk Making Minutes. But better than that, these books are vetted. I've read them all, and I feel very confident recommending them to you. I'll be adding to them continuously, so go to that link when you want to purchase a book. It will help the show, and you can feel confident it will be a purchase you will enjoy.
Okay, so that is the story of what happened with your first child. Any major differences between your first and your second child?
Oh, definitely. A more experienced parent. But I knew from the first day with my daughter, personality-wise or temperament-wise, they were, a world apart. This girl, she's a girl, she did not sleep in her first night. She fed on and on and on. And you wouldn't believe it, but her breastfeeding journey had only recently ended and she only turned 6 2 days ago.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah, she wasn't going to have anything else, okay? No, she wasn't going to have anything else. I experienced engorgement and all the other things, discomfort. I've never had mastitis with any of them or any. At the engorgement, I probably was more experienced at this stage. I did release some of the pressure with the pump. Then I knew how to massage or express milk, for example, during shower as well. If it was too tense, I knew what to do at this stage. But again, experience.
So what did you do to educate yourself about, overuse of the pump exacerbating that engorgement problem between baby 1 and baby 2? Because not every person comes to that understanding.
I realized, as I said to you, I knew from the beginning in theory that it should be a demand supply kind of situation. But then I realized that, during my first breastfeeding journey, I didn't want to be, relying on the pump so heavily and stay so uncomfortable for so long. I realized at this stage, I think I joined an extended breastfeeding social media group, possibly at some point with my second child. And there were some midwives there, more experienced. But then my friend, who was also breastfeeding for over a year, I think we were figuring things out together as well. So I already knew by the time I had my second child only to use the pump. I think I only got to use it. I probably said 2 times, but I don't think I used it. I ended up giving it away to somebody else who would be needing it more than I did. Because, yeah, like there were like inflamed areas, but I would know by now to position the baby in such a way that the chin, the rhythmic movement of the swallowing, the chin movement would be draining those ducts out. And I already knew at this stage how to firmly massage the ducts so that the milk would be removed out of those tender areas. But again, I nurse at base. So, I always have in mind this dynamic, generally a liquid that is formed within the body and that is meant to be released somehow. If it stays, it could cause problems. So I had this idea of the firm massage, like, I don't know how I can do it, but I just correlated things in my mind. I was probably more relaxed as well as a second-time parent.
Yeah, of course.
It's so amazing to notice, like from the day they are born, they are already somebody of their own. And I have so much respect, for my son and for my daughter, for the way they are. It's such a blessing and such a privilege to be observing it. Because I never had this insight. Like I never realized that you could tell, what a baby is like from the moment they are born, or you can have an idea what they are like. Yeah. She was going to get it. She was going to get her boobies. She was going to get her milk no matter what.
Yeah.
She wasn't sleeping. This one wasn't sleeping. She was feeding on and on and on and on. And again, I returned to work full time when she was 7 months old. Again, my mom and my mother-in-law were taking turns. We were blessed to have their support. We were taking turns to support us. I returned to work. But guess what? My daughter did not like the taste of any formula. Because again, I was in the same situation where I couldn't be pumping enough at work to make up for the needs of my child beyond 6 months, where breast milk is still their main source of food and nutrients. And no matter what bottles we use, no matter what formula we used, she was not going to have it. So as a result, she would need to nurse, throughout the night as usual. And quickly I realized that I couldn't sustain a full-time position anymore. Like it was too tiring. And I didn't want to end my breastfeeding journey just because my employer didn't accommodate, for the needs of a new mom. And I requested reduced hours, and the employer agreed to reduce my hours on the condition that they would demote me, like move me on a lower paid job. And I felt uneasy about that, and I thought about it, and then I decided to take a career break for a year, just to be a mom and my baby. So I did that, and then when I returned back to work after the year, I returned part-time to the lower paid position, but again, feeling uneasy about the situation. But, it was something that I felt worked for me at the time. And my second baby, my daughter, was still breastfeeding, but she was eating everything else as well. And then the conversation, the lighthearted conversations within the family, within the extended family that, are you going to be a record breaker? Are you going to be breastfeeding for longer than, your uncle or your great uncle and things like that? She was one of those kids, very determined. I wouldn't say it was easy, to be breastfeeding, 1-year-old and then a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. I wouldn't say it's easy because it is very demanding on the mom, I found that, it affected my energy. And there were times when I wasn't up for it and I didn't like it. But I was also in the mindset that, I'm doing what's best for my child. And that was the main driving factor. And then going out in public, that was an issue because, within a culture like in Ireland, people are not that familiar, or I don't know, it's not considered that, normal to be breastfeeding in public. So I always had to cover myself. Like I wouldn't feel comfortable exposing either, but I always had to cover myself. And if I was in a place where there wasn't where I could cover, or there wasn't anywhere dedicated for breastfeeding, I would have had to go into the toilets to breastfeed my child while sitting on the toilet seat. I have had to do that. I was turned away from a major shopping center in the very center of town. I wanted to book a table for myself and my child so I could breastfeed. And I was turned away. I had to go to their restaurants. But I'm telling you, Lo, I have never stepped into that very fancy shopping center ever since. And I'm not planning to for that particular reason.
I'm so sorry. And was it the same when your children were babies? Did you feel that same level of discrimination or
100%? 100%.
Okay. Wow.
It's a very sad, but it's a cultural thing, you know, and we are so vulnerable at that moment in time. I think we need to train ourselves and to be aware that these situations can pop up before birth, before having visitors to the house. Because it's only a comment, like it's nothing to hurt us, not allowed to hurt us, knowing that we are going to be in a vulnerable position. It's just somebody's reaction. It's somebody's lens, okay, to their own experiences and knowledge and whatever they have been exposed to in the past. It's not true. It doesn't have the value, the truth value, whatever your truth is or whatever your values are. It doesn't mean more than that. You know, you are the parent. You make the decisions the way you want them. And, you know, just the realization, okay, part of the mindset, part of the preparation for parenthood, the realization that whatever people are going to say, you know, it comes from within them. It doesn't have to be aligned with my values.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Is there anything else you want to share about your stories before we wrap up here?
Well, I feel like I've been sharing a lot, and I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Like, I think every mom probably wishes to share. And as you said at the beginning, you know, keeping the conversation open and going and growing, it's so important. And it makes us feel less alone, even when we are within it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And Otilia, will you tell us where people can find you if they would like to reach out for coaching or support?
Yes. I am on Instagram and on Facebook. I am called A Mom and About One. And we started off with breastfeeding fashion solutions, you know, the likes of vests and essential wear for breastfeeding moms. And I feel that I wish to give and support moms more. That's why I am training as a coach to build the confidence, to help mom build the mindset before giving birth. And, you know, to act as a facilitator, to show the supports available, you know, and as you exactly pointed, you know, to identify within your local area, you know, who are the consultants, the lactation consultants available, who are the people that I can reach out to. So mindset and identifying supports, yeah, that is what I love to help moms with. Mom and About One.
Okay, great. And we'll put that in the show notes so people can find it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lo.
On today's episode of the Milk Making Minutes, we heard a story of Otilia growing into her confidence of breastfeeding and motherhood. We heard a story of someone making the best decisions they could at any given moment. This is all you can ask of yourself when it comes to breastfeeding and parenting. You can feel more confident by setting yourself up for success by having a thoughtful and knowledgeable lactation consultant on your side. To be a part of a community that gets it, join the Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. It is linked in the show notes. I hope to see you there.